welcome to this week's episode of the Rugby Bits podcast as we do a preview of the Springboks and All Blacks and a much awaited, long awaited test match and something that we've all been looking forward to. Obviously, been earmarking it since the World Cup final and something we've been keeping an eye on. Today, we're joined by Jamie Wall, an author and rugby journo, but more importantly, he's written 4 books on the All Blacks, and one that I'm still trying to get my hands on is the 100-Year War, the story of the All Blacks and the Springboks. Jamie, welcome, man. How you doing?
Oh, I'm doing great. Thanks so much for having me. I'm really enjoying it here in South Africa.
Lovely. That's good. I'm glad you are. And obviously you're here for 2 weeks, which I'm not sure how many times you've been here before, but I think it's normally just a bit of a bounce dive, a little in and out. Now you're here for a couple of weeks.
No, this is actually my first time here. This is the only place I hadn't been to with the All Blacks so far in the rugby world. So it's a pretty special occasion for me because obviously having the test at Ellis Park and in Cape Town are the two, I guess, for New Zealanders, the most iconic places that we know of, with all due respect to the other great stadiums in this country. But, you know, these are the ones that we all have on our bucket list. So to be able to go to these places in the space of a couple of weeks is pretty amazing.
Yeah, it's pretty awesome. Ellis Park, it's big for us, but also big for you. I know the All Blacks have got a pretty good record there. So that's a big one. And then Cape Town Stadium, which is obviously not Newlands, but Cape Town's always a wonderful place to go to. That's awesome. Let's go a little bit back to your home. You are a Wellington fan. How's the NPC treating you?
Yes, I am a long-suffering Wellington fan, because if you have the misfortune of being born in Wellington, you have to follow one of the most heartbreaking teams in the competition. But Wellington's off to a really good start in the NPC. They were 3-1, I think 3 wins from 3.
3 from 3
at the moment, and just beat Taranaki, who last year's champions, in a very rainy game that I managed to catch just after I got here. Actually, thanks SuperSport for showing that. Yeah, it's going along quite nicely. They seem to have quite a good young squad mixed in with a bit of talent that's been around for a while. So yeah, early days though in the NPC. I think one of the things that perhaps people overseas might not know is that teams have to go through the season and they have 1 week each where they have to play 3 games within the space of a week. And a lot of your team's success kind of depends on A, who you're playing, and B, what time of the season that actually happens in. So I don't think Wellington have had theirs yet, but Bay of Plenty managed to get 3 wins from 3 in their first in their Storm Week, they call it. So it's a really good advantage to have that early on in the season.
Yeah, it's quite crazy, especially when looking at the fixtures, guys trying to balance things, and 100%. I think the time of the season is so important. You guys are away in Christchurch this weekend. I'm not sure how Canterbury have been doing, but you hoping to get 4 from 4, or are you a little bit nervous?
I always want to get a win over Canterbury. They have to be probably the arch rivals of Wellington. They're the 2 oldest provinces in New Zealand. So you know, some great battles over the years. You know, Wellington's probably most famous NPC final victory was over Canterbury in Christchurch, and the last time they won the NPC a couple of years ago was in the same circumstances. So yeah, province that probably the biggest rivalry that Wellington has, as well as Auckland, of course. But yeah, I think Canterbury had a loss to Hawke's Bay over the weekend, which I think is about right. Hawke's Bay are looking pretty good this year, though the current Ranfurly Shield holders. Yeah, again though, it's early days in the season. Canterbury will probably come right at some point, you'd think.
Yeah, if memory serves from Super Rugby days, they're always slow starters and they finish very strong. I'm not sure if that's carrying on in the NPC, but they're having a bit of a shaky couple of years. So interesting to see what happens going forward. Okay, on to the big one. And we're going to start off with the Springboks. Your initial thoughts, firstly, on the initial team named. You must have been quite happy that Eben Etzebeth wasn't named, and now he's come in. Your thoughts on that side?
Yeah, well, I was sitting in a room full of South African journalists when the team came through, and then obviously had the experience of having Rassie Erasmus sit up in front of us and answer questions about it. And it was pretty obvious pretty early on that there was going to be some sort of switcheroo happening at some point because he couldn't keep the grin off his face when he kept getting asked about it. And then when we were talking with the South African journalists, they were all sort of shaking their head and going, yeah, he's playing, like this has happened before and it'll happen again. This is his thing. If it was a plan to maybe throw the All Blacks off, I don't really think it's worked because we went and saw Scott Robertson that night, just as a New Zealand media only briefing. And we told him, or we asked him, what do you think about Etzebeth being back? And he said he actually was really genuinely surprised, as in like, I hadn't even know he was out. I just presumed he was playing. So there's that. But yeah, it's obviously he's a guy who we have an immense amount of respect for. I wonder between now and kickoff whether he's actually going to be elevated back into the starting team. I can totally see that happening. But yeah, it's just the way that the Springboks have obviously used their bench. It's not even really a factor anyway. He's got a specialized role that Rassie Erasmus has in mind for him to do. So maybe it's just to come in and close the game out because the All Blacks lineout has been pretty shaky this year. It's the one probably biggest area of weakness that they've had. And so perhaps to bring on Etzebeth and all his experience and his just imposing nature that he has over some pretty inexperienced All Blacks might be why this is happening, in my opinion anyway.
Yeah, it's quite interesting. Nothing's happened sort of in that manner to sort of this sort of size in the past. I know like the Springboks have got pretty clear sort of rules of engagement with the team and training and everything. I know it was made clear by Ches and Colby in chasing the sun, the first one that came out after 2019 World Cup. So yeah, this was very interesting. I'll be very surprised if it gets pushed into the starting lineup. And it'll be quite an interesting setup. So I wanted to ask you, obviously the Springboks have got a couple of different sort of game plans that they've unleashed. We've got the 2019 sort of kick chase scenario. We've got a little bit more expansive sort of setup. And then we have like a super expansive attack that we brought out against the Irish. What do you see them bringing on Saturday? And what are you more worried about?
I feel as though that game plan against Ireland, from what I took out of watching that, was specifically designed for Ireland. It was specifically designed at exploiting weaknesses that had been observed in their defence, probably based on what the All Blacks did to them at the last World Cup. And I think that the fact that you had your big ball runners out wide and then the ball was just given to them as sort of often and early as possible was specifically designed with Ireland in mind. It was too kind of obvious to probably keep it going against the All Blacks. I'm not saying they won't do it. I just don't think it's just going to be completely based around that anymore. I don't think there's going to be a super expansive game because anyone who tries to do that against the All Blacks fails. Like it's just historically, like no one's ever managed to do that. So I think it's going to be some sort of specific game plan based around key moments, like what we saw in the World Cup final, because that was, a real true test match. It was hard to watch as New Zealand, but it basically just came down to exploiting the most obvious key moments of their match, and it was just 4 penalties. 4 penalties to win that game, and I think that we're going to see something similar to that on Saturday. We're going to see. I think it's going to be a low-scoring game. I think the Springboks are probably too smart to kind of rely on their scrum, because that's been the most positive part of the All Black season so far this year. And it's no coincidence that the one game that they've lost was the game where there was no scrums for an hour. And so I think that in that regard, you're going to probably see a little more advantage taken, and like the game's going to open up a little bit more that way from the Springboks, because like you'd be stupid to put out a team like that with a backline like that, all those weapons that you've got, those world-class players, and not use them. So I don't think they're going to be, just box kicking all day.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting with Sasha Feinberg and Ngomazulu at 10, but that's not the surprising part. I think the surprising part for many is Aphelele Fassi at 15. And it's not because of Fassi's form and ability, it's more because of what he offers from 15 that what Vili offers at 15 that Aphelele Fassi doesn't. So it's more about the pressure on Sasha, about him having to really run the entire game. We'll probably see a different style of play from Damien Delendi. Like maybe, I know we were chatting about it earlier in the week, is a little bit more of a carry and a pass balancing game as opposed to just a carry game. But both Delendi and Creel are pretty good on attack in distribution. So Fassi is more one that will attack wider, probably on the 13, outside the 13 channel. So I think that's the big pressure point for us. And obviously with Low and Etzebeth on the bench, it's quite clear that there's going to be a different change of game plan when they come on. Okay, on to sorry.
Oh yeah, I mean, I was just going to say on that, I think that's probably why I think that they've got this kind of backup game plan in mind, to kind of shut the All Blacks down if they can keep an arm's length reach on the scoreboard.
Yeah. Moving on to the All Blacks now, it's Razors and the All Blacks' first tour since he's taken charge. It was a challenging opening 2 games against England. That kind of looked, there was that the All Blacks had a little bit of a wobble twice. England looked like they were in the mix in both games, and then a great win over Fiji, and then the loss to Argentina, and then obviously the massive win. Can you see the All Black management and players like have a little bit of pressure been taken off now that they've come to South Africa?
I don't think there's ever any. I mean, there's always going to be a high degree of pressure coming here and playing at Ellis Park, and they get reminded of it every time that they get a microphone put in front of them, because that's the one question that's asked. Because I mean, how could you not? It's the most iconic stadium in South Africa, and it has the most fearsome reputation probably in the whole world. So I don't think there's any lack of pressure. I think the All Blacks do enjoy being away from home a bit. Like it was the scrutiny on them, especially during the English series, was pretty intense, because everyone wanted to see how Scott Robertson would handle those first tests in charge. And, he was one missed kick away from losing his first test, and probably a bounce of the ball away from losing the second. That could have easily gone England's way. And I think that series told us a great deal about the All Blacks. It also said quite a bit about England as well. Like they're clearly on a path to becoming, a bit of a superpower again. And it's going to be really interesting when the All Blacks play them in October. But yeah, I just think in terms of pressure, like, you remember the last time they were here, right? Compared to then, the pressure is just, there isn't any, really, because the last time they came here and played at Ellis Park, it was probably the most pressure the All Blacks have been under outside of a World Cup final, and maybe even more than a couple that they've played, because you had a coach's job essentially on the line, a captain's job essentially on the line, and probably a whole bunch of players as well, who were pretty much playing for their test careers to continue after that one game. You had Scott Robertson back at home, essentially waiting to take over as soon as the final whistle was blown, and then they went out and won. And they didn't just win; they won pretty convincingly as well. I know that there's a lot of been said about the Springboks and how they picked their team and how they played that day, and yeah, that really kind of played into the All Blacks' hands. But yeah, when you say pressure, like, there's a lot of guys who were in that team 2 years ago who are back here now, probably sitting in their hotel right now, telling the guys who haven't, like, hey, don't worry. Like, yeah, it's big, it's loud, it's hostile, but we've done this before and we can do it again.
Yeah, an amazing sliding doors moment, that test match, because, wow, to think, I think the rugby world and the like rugby union landscape would have changed significantly for almost everybody if the Springboks had beaten the All Blacks in that game. It was quite something. But yeah, interesting how it all went on, and the All Blacks to make the final and just miss out. Like, we've got to be honest about it. I mean, to go down to 14 men and just miss out in the final is quite something. onto the All Blacks, I think the biggest talking point now is Sam Cane coming back into the mix. There are not, I don't know, there's not a lot of people that I know that are really anti-Sam Cane. It seems like it's more from the journos and people at home that kind of were on his back, or I don't know where it really came from, but this is a massive, massive moment for him. He doesn't have many games left in him, you know, for the All Blacks, but to come back and play against the Springboks again is huge for him, especially considering what happened in the World Cup.
Yep. He's a man whose career may have just been synonymous with being sent off in a World Cup final, and now he's got a chance to change that. Not a lot of people get a chance to rewrite the last chapter of your story, because this is the last chapter. You know, like everything he's doing in an All Black jersey from now on is the last time it's going to happen. And I think that there's a lot of goodwill towards him in New Zealand. You mentioned, he came in for a lot of criticism. I don't think it was particularly about the way he played or him as a person. It's just simply because the team wasn't winning, and New Zealanders being the harshest critics of the All Blacks and need someone to blame and it's going to be the coach and it's going to be the captain. And they were seen, I think Cane, the perception of Cane is that he was Foster's man. You know, like that was that when I don't really think that was actually true. Like he was actually Hansen's guy. You know, he'd been picked to replace McCaw way back in 2012. You know, so I mean that's how long he's been around. So to say that he was part of Foster's plan all along is not quite right. Like he was already being groomed to be All Black captain before Foster had even sort of been rubber stamped in the job. So I think another thing about Cane that perhaps you guys probably aren't sort of across is that he had that one really bad season with the Chiefs where they lost 9 games in a row, and it was the first time ever in like All Black history where we had to watch an All Black captain explain a loss 9 weeks in a row. And one of the things that you kind of have to be as an All Black captain is synonymous with success. You know, Richie McCaw, Kieran Reid, they were both in very strong Super Rugby teams. You know, all going back to Sean Fitzpatrick, part of a really like the best provincial side ever. You know, it's just like they have to be seen to be winning kind of all the time to be proven to be the guy to be in charge of a team that should be winning all the time, if you know what I mean. So I think he suffered a bit from that. I think Scott Barrett was lucky this year that he was injured for most of what was a horrible season with the Crusaders. And he, you know, if they don't get better next year, he's going to come under the same sort of scrutiny as well. So that's just a bit of a backstory about Cane. Like it's kind of one of those, it's not personal. It's like there just had to be some sort of explanation as to what was going on with the All Blacks over the last 4 years. And he copped it, you know, and you know, some of it was warranted. You know, some of it was, you know, things weren't going right in that team. And, you know, the results showed that. But I think that just as a person, as a player, as a guy who literally broke his neck for his country here in South Africa, and, you know, recovered and came back and played, and is known as a guy who's essentially just doing all the dirty work for the All Blacks. You know, Artie's got his highlight reels and everything like that, but someone's got to be in there making tackles. Somebody's got to be in there in the rucks, you know, punishing the opposition players, and that's what Sam Cane does. So I'm really happy to see him there at the open side on the weekend.
Yeah, and you know, he was also the captain and that player that was during that transition period where the All Blacks went from being where they were to where they are now. Like, so as you said, it was 100% about someone they wanted to blame, and you bang on about like him doing the dirty work. He's a solid 7.5, 8 out of 10 week in and week out, but he's doing the 7.5, 8 out of 10 work that you don't really like, no one really wants to do and goes a lot unseen. And someone has to do it in order for Ardie to be free. Like, you've got to have that balance. You can't have a whole bunch of sort of wild, sort of open players. You've got to have the guys that are playing to the ball and just doing all that sort of stuff. And I think that's the big thing. And I mean, he's playing his 97th test now, 97, 96. So, you know, I'm hoping he'll get to his 100 and it'll be great for him. This whole week and next week, really, the Rugby Championship hinges on it. It's going to be won or lost in South Africa. And it's going to be quite something. Another person I want to chat to is about Beauden Barrett. And I was actually having a look at his numbers. He's on 128 tests. I was kind of thinking, like, does he have a chance to take over and become the most capped All Black player ever? I don't think time is on his side, but my word, he's undroppable at the moment.
Yeah, well, I mean, if he keeps playing like this, he could get to about 200 tests. He's obviously got another World Cup cycle in him, and if he's on 128 now, and I mean, I don't think there's ever been any talk of dropping him out of the squad. Like, there's been talk of perhaps using him as a bench player going forward because of that great performance he had against England, where he came on and essentially just won the game for the All Blacks. And so he's got a lot more longevity in his legs, and I think that the main conversation about him though is he's mostly there to stick around just a failsafe at number 10. You know, like, because we can we've seen him develop into a world-class fullback and a world-class bench player, but you've got to remember that he was a 10 first and foremost. And Damian McKenzie is a guy who always has this conversation around him about consistency and just sort of the whole kind of mercurial aspect of his game means that people are never going to completely appreciate what the magic that he can do, but never completely trust him until he can put together like an entire season of consistent performances. Whereas Beauden Barrett has done that before, so he's always there as this kind of fail-safe option. But yeah, you mentioned that he could be the record holder for All Black tests. I can completely see that happening because the amount of tests that they're going to be playing over the next 4 years, and if he just stays as fullback or a bench role, then yeah, I see no reason why he can't.
And he's the only backline player in the top 5. I think Aaron Smith's number 6, but that's quite something. You talk about McKenzie and Barrett, and obviously, like, I'm looking at the All Blacks now and trying to figure out where they're going to go at 10. If something happens to McKenzie, whether it's a form or an injury, they'd have to go back to Beauden initially. Stephen Perifetta was someone that actually surprised me. I didn't think he was like going to settle into the All Black side, but the couple of games he had before he got injured, he was in decent form, but they played him at 15. What are your 10 options moving forward besides Beauden?
Yeah, well, that's the $1 million question.
Yeah.
Back in New Zealand, you'd have to think that Perifetta is an option, although just weirdly he ended up at fullback just simply because he got injured earlier this season. Zahn Sullivan at the Blues got injured as well, and then Harry Plummer ended up coming in to 10 at the Blues and completely fitted what Vern Cotter was trying to do with that team. So when Perifetta came back, Plummer had taken that role. And Perifetta went to fullback, really impressed there and got in the All Blacks. So it was just kind of, he was almost lucky to get injured in the situation that he had. Plummer is a guy that is clearly, next on the depth chart as well, because he's in the All Black squad right now. He's here in Johannesburg. He's not going to get a game in the next 2 weeks, but they clearly want him around the squad to, integrate him into the system and get him playing, get him up to speed with what the All Blacks are doing. Because yeah, he is clearly the next option that they have. He's probably what you call like a very safe option at 10. He's a kicking 10, and he's a guy who can really run a game manager, which is a kind of slightly critical view. But what I mean by that is that he's very good at directing traffic, and you saw that during the Blues season. He's very, very good with front football and his option taking, and his goal kicking was fantastic. He kicked, I think it was 7 from 7 in the Super Rugby final as well. So he'd be the next one, and then below him there's a lot of young, promising guys that are probably nowhere near Test rugby at the moment, floating around in Super Rugby and the NPC. There's Brett Cameron at the Hurricanes. There was a bit of chat about him, considering how well the Hurricanes did this year, but I feel like he'd probably need to take a pretty big step up from the level that he's playing right now. But then after that, you're down to some pretty kind of hit and hope options, really.
Basically, you guys need to break the bank to get Richie Mo'unga back after he went to Japan and said he was happy to stay there for the rest of his career or something silly. So I think that's something that they have to get him back regardless of what happens at 10, because he totally changes everything.
Yeah, that's a fair point. I think that, usually when guys go overseas, someone just comes in and just takes over and you forget about the last guy. But Mo'unga is one that you're like, damn, if we actually had him right now, things would be feeling a lot different.
Massive. It's probably a 10-point kind of a player that every game. It's bizarre. He's so comfortable in the role. And Plummer, I agree with what you say. He's completely different 10 to what is currently in the squad, whether it's McKenzie or Barrett. So he's going to need Geordie to do a lot of work at 12, or Anton Leonard-Brown. It seems like they're trying to put him, maybe draft him into 12 or 13 as a cover option. But he'd need his centers to do a hell of a lot. And obviously whoever's playing 15 to help him out. But quite an interesting one. I'd quite like to see him get a chance in the All Black 10s, but it'll probably be probably later this year or November, more likely. Just wanted to go onto the bench. What's your thinking behind Mark Talia being benched? It seems like such a bizarre option. Will Jordan can totally understand why he's there, but Caleb Clark, what is the option there? What's the game plan you think that they're going to focus on with Talia on the bench?
Yeah, that's a great point, because there's something we definitely have been talking about since the team got named. It feels like he is taking over the role that Caleb Clark actually did pretty well last year, which was to come off the bench and just hunt around the ruck, and not so much play as a winger, but just more of sort of a drifting attacking player who just hangs around near the ball and looks for gaps. And his ability to break tackles and his awkward running style kind of fits what they're trying to do there. I just haven't seen him sort of really do that at test level before. He did it for the Blues. To be fair, like, the Blues' whole game plan was to, use guys like that in close to the ruck and just simply go forward. So him and Clark did a lot of running off the ruck. So I feel like that's the logic behind that selection. But again, I haven't seen him do anything like that at test level before.
Yeah, it's quite interesting. And what sort of game plan? Because obviously the Springboks, and for any team that's dominant at the time, you kind of think that they're going to dictate everything in terms of, like, we're going to impose our game plan on you and you guys need to figure out a way around it and then hopefully come through. That's not in the All Blacks DNA, but they're going to have to learn it in certain spaces. What's coming out of them? Where do you see the weakness in the Springboks and where do you see the strength in the All Blacks?
Well, I mentioned before the strength of the All Blacks is scrum. And so I feel like they will be hunting penalties around that, which will turn into field position. And then if you can impose your will on the game by simply keeping the ball in the other team's half, which is the biggest issue the All Blacks had in the one loss that they did against Argentina, was they kept playing they played the game in the wrong half for the whole time. The next week at Eden Park, it was a completely different story. So I think that if they can, get on the right side of the referee, get their scrum going well, which I completely believe that they can, because it's been really good so far this season, then they can dictate the pace of the game. In terms of weaknesses in the Springboks, well, I guess just from an outsider looking in point of view, it would be to target the younger, newer players. You got a young first five who's got a lot of hype around him, and rightly so, because he's been really good and he has looked really comfortable at test level. So perhaps if the All Blacks can be the first ones to put the squeeze on Sasha Feinberg and Ngomazulu and just find out what he's like under some sort of real pressure, because it feels like he's kind of had it his own way this whole time. So that's where I feel like they'll be going for. The two areas is just sending Sam Cane at him to just remind him what it's like to get tackled.
Yeah, seems like it's going to be the case. A little bit of news that came out. Just is there anything else you want to close out on the Springbok and All Black game before I jump back onto the NPC?
No, I mean, I think that, obviously there's been a lot of talk about the crowd and things like that, but I just can't reiterate enough just how much that last game, like how much more pressure the All Blacks were under. Like there's so much talk this week about, hostility and the way the crowd's going to react and stuff. It's like the All Blacks are very good at shutting all that noise out. And the best way they can do it is just score a couple of tries early and just turn the volume down just a little bit. So yeah, I think that's probably the Springboks are going to have to beat them by playing rugby. They can't rely on the crowd to do it for them.
Yeah, and it's massive. And to be fair, the All Blacks and the Irish are probably the best at scoring a couple of early tries, and it does affect the Springboks. It really changes the way they play and how they manage things. That is the one thing that I've realized. They're not completely comfortable in their new space, because there's always a new space, a new thing that's happening. They're not completely comfortable in it to absorb those 10 points and then work on. They showed it against Ireland when we went down, but we still ended up losing. Just wanted to go back to the NPC, and news came out today that Hadleigh Parkes has signed again for Manawatu. And what's the first time in 10 years that he's playing for the Turbos, and he's straight back in onto the bench. The man's an honorary Saffers abroad, having played for the Kings here. It's an unbelievable journey he's made, going full circle back to New Zealand, eh?
Yeah, journey's the right word, because that guy's got to be the ultimate journeyman of world rugby. I think if you when you see someone's Wikipedia page and you've got all the list of teams that they've played on, and you have to scroll down to get to the bottom of it, like that, Hadleigh Parkes, you have to scroll down right down. Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting one, because the NPC is kind of made up of mostly of promising young players, and then you get the odd guy like Hadleigh Parkes coming back, like Ryan Crotty came back as well, and Dwayne Sweeney, who I don't know if you've heard of, but he's a Waikato player who went overseas, and like he's like almost my age, coming back and playing. And we had like Jason Rutledge, who didn't actually go overseas. He just went off and worked on his farm for for a few years, but he was playing NPC at like age 42.
And the Crusaders had a prop last year who'd also just come back. I can't remember who it was.
Oh, it's John Alpha.
Yes. Yeah. He's also got like 500 first-class games under his belt.
Yes. Yeah. So it always feels like the NPC is home to these guys. Like they can always come home and just like finish off their career. It would be pretty cool if Hadleigh Parkes did finish where he started, because that's where he's from. Yeah. He's a Manawatu guy. So to have done the big sort of route that he has, playing in pretty much every country in the world and all these teams that he has, and then to finish back with Manawatu, who are actually, decent side. They're not going to win the NPC, but they definitely have some pretty decent players in there. Like, it's pretty cool to see.
Yeah, it's a good thing. And obviously a lot of South Africans quite like him, having played here as well. As one of his 3 of 7 steps. I think we were number 3 or number 2, but yeah. Jamie, just want to wrap up there. I just want to say thanks so much for coming on. We really, really appreciate it. It's great getting some of your insights, and thanks very much, and good luck for the weekend, but not too much, eh?
Oh, thanks, mate. I really appreciate coming on. It's great chatting with you guys. As always, love your work, and keep it up. And to be honest, mate, I'm not really fussed about the result, given what my job is. It's just to write down what happens. But I am really, really looking forward to getting the South African rugby experience at Ellis Park. It's something that, in the job that I have, you get pretty cynical and you get pretty kind of, okay, it's a new day, a new stadium, it's like whatever. But this one is special. This is the place where I've really, really wanted to go. So yeah, it's going to be epic. And once again, thanks very much for having me on.
It's a pleasure, and thank you. And to all the listeners, please like and comment below, and we'll definitely catch up next week with a roundup of the opening test, which hopefully the Springboks win, but you never know. It's going to be a cracker. Thanks very much. Bye, guys.